In the last video, I showed you the cube that we're going to be building for this video, and I talked a bunch about perspective. So in this video, we're going to use perspective as well as all of our other animation knowledge in order to build out that cube. So to get started, I just have this HTML on the left. You can download from the description down below. And the first thing we need to do is add a few different classes. We're going to have a class for our container, which contains our different sides, and that's going to be our cube. And then each one of the sides of our cube is just going to have a class of side to represent this side class. And we're also going to give each one a class representing which side it is. So we have front for our front. Let's just copy this down to all of our examples. We're going to have left for our left-hand side, then right, our back side, top side, and the bottom. So now we can access all of these in our CSS. Also, let's link in a style sheet here. So we're just going to call this styles.css. And let's just save this, open up, create a styles.css. And in here, we're just going to create a few different base styles. We're just going to have our box sizing be border box. We're also going to set up our body to center everything. So we'll just display flex, justify our content in the center, align our items in the center, set up our min height. This is just going to be 100 VH, and also remove that margin. So now we have everything in the dead center exactly as we want. Our next step is going to be setting up these sides so that they look like the sides of our actual cube. So we can just select our side here. I want to specify a variable which is going to represent the size of our cube. Each side is going to be 75 pixels by 75 pixels. So we can set the height to that size variable, just like that. And we can do the exact same thing by setting our width. And if we give this a background color, we're going to be able to see these changes take effect. So let's just do the background color that I almost always use. We're going to use HSLA though, because we want our cube to be partially transparent. We're going to do 200, 100%, 50%, and then 50% opacity. If we save, you can see we have these nice partially opaque blue rectangles which represent our different sides of our cube. Now in order to get our cube to stack on top of itself all over, what we want to do is just position these absolutely. So we'll just say position, absolute, and now if we save, you can see our cubes are stacked right on top of each other, which is exactly what we want. Now in order to get our rectangles, our sides here to be centered, let's select our cube, and we can just set up a basic display flex in here. So we'll say display of flex. We want to justify our content in the center, and we're going to align our items in the center. And if we save, you see that's now moved up all of our different sides over top of each other in the dead center of our screen. The next thing we want to do is specify a border for our element. So we're going to say border here, and this is just going to be a 1 pixel solid dark border, and we're just going to make this a darker version of the background color. And if we save, you see we have that nice border around our elements. That'll make it easy to see when our sides are joining up right next to each other. And then also let's come in here and just center our text. We're just going to use flexbox again for that. So we'll display flex, justify our content in the center, and we're going to align our items in the center. And there we go. We have our text in the dead center, and our sides are pretty much completely done. The next step is going to be setting these up in a 3D orientation to make the actual cube. So let's just take our right side, for example, and what we want to do on our right side is we want to set up a transform, and we want to rotate this on the Y direction because the Y is our vertical orientation here. And in order to get this element to show up, we want to rotate it around this vertical line. So essentially you can imagine that we're going to rotate this around that vertical axis. So the right hand side of our object is going to go around behind that line, and the left side is going to go in front of that line. You can almost imagine this like you have a piece of paper in front of you, and you want to turn that piece of paper until the edge of the paper is facing towards you, and then the front of the paper will be facing out towards the right hand side. So we're going to rotate this Y direction by 90 degrees. And if we save this, you're going to notice something interesting. If we remove all of our sides except for that right side, so remove left, back, top, and bottom, and we save, you're going to notice nothing shows up. And that's because we're just looking at a paper thin level of our right side because we've rotated it all the way. If we change this to, for example, 70 degrees, we can see just a thin sliver of our right degree. But once we change it to 90, we're looking at the side of the paper and it's impossible to see. So in order to make this visible, we need to set up some type of perspective on our body. So we'll just come in here, we'll say perspective of 400 pixels. And again, you'll still notice that we don't see anything on our screen. And the reason for this is that our perspective origin is in the dead center of our screen, and our object is also in the dead center, so we still are only seeing the very edge of our piece of paper. what we want to do is to translate our object slightly away from the edge of our screen. So what we're going to use is translate in the Z direction. This is essentially translating something to and from us, but since we've already rotated 90 degrees, this is actually going to translate us left and right. So in order to move this object to the right, the correct distance, we want to move it half the width of our cube. So we can just say in here that we want to do a calc of our variable for size, and we want to divide it by 2. Now if we save, you're going to notice we can barely see this right hand side of our cube, which is exactly what we want. And also this right hand side of our cube is right on the very, very edge of our side for the front. If we bring in our front side again, you can see that once we move our front side, it's going to line up perfectly with the front hand side of our object over here. So let's select our front. And we want to make sure that we do this exact same translate Z for our front. So we can say transform of our translate Z. So we're just going to bring this forward to us by half the width. And you can see that makes the corners of our object line up exactly as we want. So this is exactly what we want our cube to do, but we need to do this for all of our sides. So in order to avoid copying all of this code, we're actually going to set up one single transform on our object. And this single transform is going to take in a rotation on the Y direction. It's going to take in a rotation on the X direction, and it's going to do our translation in the Z direction, which we already know is going to be half of our size. So we can just copy that in for now. We're also going to create a variable for our Y rotation, which is just going to be rotate Y, and we're just going to default this to 0. And we're going to do the same thing for our X direction. We're just going to call this rotate X and default it to 0. So now instead of actually putting our rotation inside of our transform, we can just say rotate Y of 90 degrees. And now if we remove all of this extra code and we save, we get the exact same result. So now for each of our sides, we can just tell it where we want it to rotate to. Let's come in here and do another side, which do our left side, which right now is just on the top. And our left side is going to be almost identical to our right hand side, except for instead of rotating to the right 90 degrees, we want to rotate it to the left 90 degrees. So we're going to use -90. And if I spell left correct, you can see our left side of the cube is now where we want it to be. Let's do the exact same thing, which is going to be for our top. And our top is going to have an X rotation. So we're going to come in here with our top side of our cube, and we're going to rotate the X direction. And if we save, right now we're at the bottom because we did negative. So let's do +90, and that's going to put us at the top of our cube. Going to do the exact same thing for the back and the bottom, which right now are just showing up on the top. So let's do our bottom first, because this is going to be just like our top, except for we're going to do -90 degrees. And then for our back, what we're going to do here is we're going to rotate in the Y direction, and we're just going to rotate 180 degrees. Just like that. And now you can see all of our different elements are exactly where we want them on our cube. Except for one really interesting thing that you'll notice is that our back and our front are actually overlaying each other in a weird way. The back is showing up above the front, and that's not something that we want. So in order to fix this, what we need to do is we need to tell our cube its transform style, and we need this to be preserve 3D. Now, if we save that, you can see that's fixed everything. And what this preserve 3D does is it essentially says that when we're doing three-dimensional transforms on an object, preserving the 3D means that the children of that object will be allowed to pass through the parent, while if the default here is flat, then this means that all of the animations must be on the plane of the parent instead of being allowed to pass through the parent. And since our back needs to be behind our parent, essentially behind our cube, we need to make sure that we set this to preserve 3D instead of having it as flat. Pretty much anytime you're dealing with three-dimensional transforms, you're going to want to put preserve 3D for your transform style. And with that done, we have our fully functioning cube built out, as you can see. So the next thing to do is just to set up the basic animation. So we're just going to select our cube when we hover over it, and we want to put an animation on our overall cube to make it just rotate around looking really cool. Essentially, all we want to do is make it spin. So we're going to call it spin over 5 seconds. It's going to be linear. And it's just going to happen forever and ever as long as you keep your mouse over the cube. So let's create the keyframes for that. It's going to be called spin. And we want to just have, at 0% some rotation. And at 100%, we also want some rotation. So let's do in here a transform, and this transform is going to rotate in the X direction from 0, and then at the 100%, it's going to be at 360, essentially one full rotation all the way around our cube. And if we hover, you can see in the X direction, we're rotating all the way around our cube 360 degrees. Now in order to do the Y direction as well, let's just put in rotate Y, starting at 0, and we'll go to rotate Y of 360 degrees. Now if we save, you can see we get this nice rotation that goes all the way around our cube for all of our different sides from 0 to 360 degrees, and just keeps going and going and going forever and ever, as long as we have our mouse hovered over top of this. And that's all it takes to build out this fully rotating cube. Now, most of the time when you're dealing with CSS animations, you're not really going to have 3-dimension animations all over the place on your site, but it is still important to understand the idea of perspective and how it works. And I think this cube project is a great way to just really wrap your head around that perspective idea and that perspective property. In the next video, we're going to go back to the Bootcamp landing page, and we're going to add in a bunch of animations to really bring that page to life and make it so much more than just a static page of content. So I can't wait to see you in that video.